It's been an insanely busy few days in the PC gaming space anyway, with the Xbox Game Showcase, the Summer Games Fest, and the PC Gaming Show all taking place over about a period of 5 days. In this video, I'm going to show you some of my hand-picked selections, some of the best games that of course suit us here on this channel, strategy and simulation games, but I'll have a few other honourable mentions thrown into the mix because it really was quite outstanding, just the amount of stuff that came out over the last few days. So sit back and relax and let's take a look. First and foremost, Cities Skylines 2, which not only received this new trailer, but also received a release date of October 24th. My birthday, thank you, Colossal Order. That is probably the greatest gift you could have ever given. Why? I was a big fan of Cities Skylines 1. I think it is a fantastic, not just city simulator, urban planner, but also, of course, it simulates traffic and an economy and all of those other parts that go into making a living city. In this trailer, we see a lot more, I believe twofold. Firstly, we see a slightly more beautiful looking game, as you might expect. Graphics have been brought into the future, at least a little bit. But secondly, we see more gameplay, more UI, more features, including buildings, transit routes, ways of placing cities by bulk, and other things that we haven't quite seen before in Cities Skylines 1. Some people have played the game already, including the architect of this city, and they claim it to be very good. I'm looking forward to seeing what Colossal Order, of course published by Paradox, have in store for us when the game releases on October 24th of this year. Now, let's move on to my next pick, which was another big name, this time not so much a strategy simulation city builder, but of course more of a real-time strategy game. And it's also important to note, a free-to-play one. This is Stormgate. Stormgate from Frost Giant Studios, if you're unfamiliar, with that StarCraft legacy behind it, is essentially the next generation of real-time strategy. From seeing this gameplay and from the sort of initial reviews and takes on it, people have generally concluded that this game is shaping up pretty good. A blend between classic RTS and the future of RTS, whatever that might mean. On a more practical level, of course, you can play co-op versus AI, competing in 1v1 or 3v3 clashes, in a very typical RTS fashion, whereby you have a base, they have a base, fight, strike, conquer, and win. That's the fundamentals, but this is the first time that we've actually seen proper footage of Stormgate. Up until now, it's, in my opinion, really only been about 5 or 10 seconds of gameplay. Now we get to see it play out a little bit more. I'll of course be following this one, and unfortunately, we don't yet know its release date, so more to come. Next, we have Earthless. And this one, while it had a beautiful trailer, thankfully also released with some screenshots so that you can actually get a feel for what the gameplay looks like. Because like I say, the trailer was great, but it doesn't necessarily give a lot away. Earthless, in case you can't tell, is a DECK builder at its core, and a roguelike one at that. The premise is that you're inside of a sci-fi world. The battles take place, as I've mentioned, as roguelike DECK building fights. You are captain of humanity, or at least your portion of it, and you're trying not only to navigate through the stars procedurally to find new areas to get more gear and upgrade, but also there's a overall premise of just trying to stay alive. And to quote them, they say, "To find a new home, you must draw your own path through the stars and play the hand you're dealt." And that is a fantastic pun for this kind of game. It promises to have a story that can build on itself, continue to expand and ever evolve. It also promises to present other challenges, like personality traits for the different characters, humans that we're playing with, and a few other nuanced factors that I think could make this one well worth checking out when it releases in 2024. Releasing in 2024, this is Nova Roma. Nova Roma, published by Hooded Horse and developed by Lion Shield, is the second city builder to make it into this list, although of course very different from Cities 2. From the developers of Kingdoms and Castles, and I think that shows, it plays through in the art style and the aesthetics inside of this game. This is a city builder not just using the Roman world as a backdrop, but trying to build on it a bit more too. They talk about, in the game's description, certain things like you must appease the gods with grand temples to meet your citizens' needs. Of course, there's a resource collection and management thing here, as well as an overall sort of Roman law, politics advisory role in how the game explores culture, politics, and military units, military trials of the era. I think that the game also focuses in on something else quite interesting, which is that of disaster, that kind of SimCity-esque style, let me build a big dam, smash it down, and watch the place fall to pieces. Now, of course, that can only be enabled if there are interesting and nuanced physics-based systems for the environment. And one of the things that they've shown off handily in this trailer is how the game deals with water, aqueducts, dams, the flow of water, and the role that that will play in the city builder. I'm interested to see how this one develops and how it plays out, and we'll certainly have more to come, I hope, in future. Adding a third and probably final city builder to the list, this is the new trailer for Frostpunk 2. Frostpunk, the original one, I think is a great city builder. It is, of course, set at the backdrop of survival. This is a harsh world, and the city must survive. It's a dangerous climate, an interesting art style, and overall, I thought, a really interesting and nuanced strategy game. Frostpunk 2, therefore, has captured my interest, but unfortunately, I hate to say that in this case, the trailer just didn't do it. Unlike a lot of other things where we saw lots of gameplay reveals, maybe release dates, gave us something to grab onto for Frostpunk 2, unfortunately, all we got was a release date of 2024. Now, that doesn't set it apart from the rest of the things on this list, but I'm just slightly disappointed to say that there's not really much else to say on that one. However, there's quite a bit to say on this. Warhammer, Age of Sigmar, Realms of Ruin. Granted, an incredibly long-winded title, honestly. It sounds like some sort of mobile game ripoff, but it's not. This is set inside of the Warhammer world, and unlike some of the other experiences that you may have had with Warhammer, this is purely an action RTS game. A strategy, of course, at the whole, but really real-time strategy is what's playing out. And I'd encourage you to take a look not just at the units themselves, but at the minimap down in the bottom right, at the UI up the top, calculating potentially the speed of the battle, the strength of the armies. This is an RTS game for RTS games' sake. And so I think that it will potentially fill a niche as well. It looks to be very smooth, very in fitting with the Warhammer world. We don't know too much more about it yet, though. It doesn't have any kind of release date, pegged only as coming soon. We do know, of course, it will offer online multiplayer and other things that we would expect from this kind of genre. So this one is very much a watch this space optimistically. This one, Last Train Home, was a pleasant surprise for me during the weekend's events. Last Train Home is a strategy, real-time strategy game with really more of a sort of real-time tactics feel to it if we're gonna go down that rabbit hole of dividing things into slightly different groups. And I thought it had one of the most impressive trailers in its animation style and how it told a story, pulling these sort of real-world-esque scenes and then blending it through into the gameplay. The fundamentals behind the game is that the Great War, World War I, is done, but the fighting rages on, and you are in charge of a legion of soldiers who are trying to make their way home to your Czech homeland through the violence and chaos of civil war, the Reds versus the Whites in Russia, for example. The world itself is still in conflict. The way the game plays out in practice is, of course, through those real-time tactics, these fights that you play out in individual maps. But also there's a broader strategy element to it as well, potentially of the pathways that you might take, of your train, how you manage it, upgrade it, get additional gear for it, and of course your people as well, and potentially kind of an XCOM style way of approaching having a battalion, having a legion of people who are each slightly different and have different needs to be tended to. This one doesn't yet have any kind of indication on its release date, but it's certainly piqued my interest, so I hope that it's sometime soon, and not an Elder Scrolls 6 deal. Moving along to a couple of things that are a little bit different, those honorable mentions that I mentioned at the start of this video before we return to strategy game at the end. This is Star Wars Outlaws. Star Wars Outlaws from Ubisoft, potentially, hopefully, one of the better things that Ubisoft will be producing in recent times. Ticks all of the boxes that a Star Wars fan might want. It's got a droid who's cool. It's got a little cute thing that isn't a human, and it has a main protagonist looking to do good in the world with a slightly badass style to them. More appropriately, and if you want to actually know a little bit more detail about it, it is an open world game. One of the only open world Star Wars games, obviously quite a difficult thing to chew off, considering the legacy that the franchise holds and the expectation that we'll have as fans or players of the game. Now, we don't know too much more about Star Wars Outlaws. However, we did see not just this kind of more cinematic footage, but of course, in-game footage as well. There's about 10 minutes of it available online. I won't and can't and shouldn't arguably show it all off here. So I'd encourage you to go and check out the full 10 minutes of gameplay footage, even more so, if you want to get a proper feel for how it plays. But looking at the in-game footage here, and specifically this fight, I think it demonstrates at least an open world that could be worth our time. Whether it has a rich story to it is yet to be known. We also don't yet know its release date, so much like many of the other new games on this list, keep your eyes peeled in future. And while there were many significant things that I could have talked about, like the reboot of Fable, Cyberpunk 2077's new DLC, which allegedly is adding an incredible amount to that poor game, and many other things. This is Starfield, of course, straight out of Bethesda, the creators of such wonderful experiences like Skyrim and Fallout 4. It's an RPG in an open world setting, and this one is a brand new IP. Of course, it comes from a wealth of development experience inside of this realm and a wealth of glitches. Apparently 25 years in the making. I just can't picture someone sitting down with their Commodore 64 envisioning a game like this, but maybe that's just me. The crucial thing to note here is that Starfield is trying to deliver something new. It's been a long time in the making. Of course, we heard about Elder Scrolls 6, which is apparently also in the making, but this is really Bethesda's big baby. And it's coming out in just a couple of months. After several delays and fears of extended delays, it looks like actually it's coming through. We know that it'll be a massively open RPG type of world. We also know that sort of to do with the main storyline, as we cross through different settings, different planets, different themes, some things look kind of Western, others very sort of postmodern. The idea is that there's some sort of relic, some sort of thing that we are collecting to uncover some secrets in the universe. And you see it play out and you hear them talk about it a little bit in the gameplay footage as well. But that is sort of the overall storyline in a nutshell. But many times these games are also about the side stories, the world itself. And as I joked about earlier, the many glitches involved in something so big and so catastrophically bold out of Bethesda. Towards the end of the footage and the actual gameplay footage itself, I'd encourage you to go and check it out. There's quite a few minutes of it on the internet. You see a combat system and a UI that's very familiar to something like Fallout, for example. I'm excited to see how this one plays out in just a couple of months. And last but not least on my list, Baldur's Gate 3. Baldur's Gate 3, which you can play right now, and you've been able to do so for quite a long time, is in early access. Of course, not the full game, but quite a lot of it. Baldur's Gate 3 received some new footage, some new announcements. We heard, of course, about this new antagonist that you're seeing on your screen at the moment. And then the second focus, I think slightly later in the weekend, maybe even a couple of days later, was around the city of BG3, the main center, Baldur's Gate. And in the footage, which was somewhat limited, really, just sort of 5 or 10 seconds here or there with the developers cutting in and out constantly in between to talk about how they felt about it, they expressed that this was a massive living city. One anecdote they used was, I was up in a tower and I looked down across many, many, many buildings and saw my teammates standing down at the wharf. That kind of livability where the city isn't compartmentalized, but instead is actually one big open space. And I think that we've seen that in a few of these trailers, actually, that attempt to try and build cohesive worlds. Thank you so much for joining me today, everybody, in what has been a pretty exciting weekend. I'm sure I've missed many things, but I think that this is a fairly conclusive overall look at what we've got on offer. I'll see you next time.